Hello, everyone. Um, Welcome to our Community College STEM Network webinar. My name is Michelle Vanoy, and I'm Director of the Education and Employment Research Center at Rutgers University, and a PI of the CCSN. The CCSN is a network that connects and supports researchers and practitioners in conducting and translating research on how students navigate STEM pathways into evidence-based practices, programs, and policies. We're really excited that you're with us today for this webinar. Just to let everybody know, we are recording this webinar, and it'll be shared with everybody later to watch. We ask that you keep your cameras off for the duration of the webinar, but encourage everyone to ask any questions or provide comments throughout in the chat, and we'll answer them during the presentation. I'm going to, at this point in the webinar, hand things over to my colleague Maria Espino from Rutgers, from the CCSN, who's going to moderate our very exciting discussion today with Julie Wang, who we're delighted to have join us today to share her research. So I'm going to hand things over to Maria, who's going to moderate and lead our discussion today. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Radnoy, for introducing the CCSN and welcoming you all here to the webinar. Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for spending the next hour with us here today. My name is Dr. Maria Luz Espino, she, her, hers, Aya, and I am a researcher for the Education and Employment Research Center, as Michelle has mentioned, and a member of the CCSN. That we are really excited to have you all here today and be engaged in this amazing conversation that we're going to be having momentarily. Before I get the chance to introduce our amazing guest for today, I did want to provide a couple logistics and flow of the webinar so you all can kind of have a forecast of what it's going to look like. So we'll begin with an interview style conversation focusing on the amazing work of Dr. Julie Wang that they have done through the community college setting and STEM. This conversation will be followed by questions and answers from you all to add to the discussion. If you have any questions, please write them in the chat, write them down, or do whatever you can to organize yourselves as we get into this larger open communication and conversation that we want to have with you all here today. And kind of to get us started into our conversation, as I mentioned, I have the pleasure and I have the amazing opportunity to be here to talk to Dr. Julie Wang, an innovator, an amazing contributor to the field, great mentor and dear friend of mine. So I'm very excited to be here with you all to have this conversation to explore a little bit more of the community college work in STEM. To introduce Dr. Julie Wang, Dr. Julie Wang is a Barbara and Glenn Thompson Endowed Professor in Educational Leadership and a Professor in Higher Education at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She teaches graduate courses on community colleges, mixed methods research and education, and assessment in higher education. Often centering community and technical colleges, her equity-driven research spans a range of topics including student success and mental health, transfer trajectories, faculty development, teaching and learning, and educational change and innovation. As a principal investigator, Dr. Wang has secured over $5 million in research funding, often in partnerships with community and technical colleges. She is the author of On My Own, The Challenge and Promise of Building Equitable STEM Transfer Pathways, and the new book, Delivering Promise, Equity-Driven Educational Change and Innovation in Community and Technical Colleges. Dr. Wang was honored with the Transfer Champion Catalyst Award by the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students in 2021, the Barbara Townsend Lecture Award by the Association for the Study of Higher Education in 2020, and the University of Wisconsin-Madison School of Education's Faculty Distinguished Achievement Award in 2020. So thank you, Dr. Wang, for all the amazing work you've done and for being here with us today. So to kind of get us started and getting to know a little bit about yourself, Dr. Wang, can you tell us a little bit about yourself? What led you to the work to do here that you've done so far with STEM and community colleges?
Well, first of all, thank you so much, Dr. Espino and Maria. It's such a joy and pleasure to be with you all. And also just who shows up for a summer webinar, right? So it's just amazing to see some new, actually some old friends, and also meeting many new colleagues and friends. And so I'm truly, truly humbled and looking forward to our conversation today. And Maria, thank you so much for giving me a fantastic outline so that I know what to expect. But back to your question in terms of sort of like, kind of what in multiple layers of my own background, what led me to this work, and also saying a little bit more about myself. I've been grappling with, the pandemic has really compelled all of us to do a lot of reflections about what work matters to us, what among our professional and personal identities truly matter to us. And then I've gained my own clarity just over the past few years, kind of to introduce myself in a community like this. I view myself as a researcher who really values and aspires to center community and technical colleges in my work. And I hope as a researcher, I can help support the generation of findings that would be meaningful for both students, but more importantly, educators working to support students on the ground. So I think that's kind of like blending a lot of my interests and identities. And so in terms of how I got into this work, centering community colleges, STEM, but at the intersection is really transfer pathways in STEM from community colleges to onward and beyond. It started really more kind of from a personal level, going back to years back when I was in graduate school, focusing on higher education leadership and policy and student affairs. Didn't necessarily know my final dissertation topic, only knowing that, okay, I care about higher education. I wanted to do something that would help inform policy and practice. And it was really through personal encounters with some of the most amazing community college transfer students attending Ohio State at the same time when I was enrolled as a doctoral student there. And through those experiences, I really got to experience their success and their brilliance and their community orientation firsthand. And that was really coinciding also with the fact that as a budding doctoral student, I was introduced to the American community college literature. That was mind-blowing for me. I was an international student coming from an educational background that was very structured with very limited to no possibility in terms of student mobility across institutions and beyond, one level onto the next and beyond. So just the idea of open access and mobility and democracy represented in the American Community College was completely uplifting and intellectually inspiring. So these two things kind of blended together really solidified my commitment to a center in community college and transfer in my dissertation work. But fast forward, when I started my faculty role here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison back in 2010, I was, ready. My entire dissertation was about transfer from community colleges to foreign institutions, and I was ready to continue to deepen that journey. And then I was introduced to our, very interesting two-year college system. There's community college. There's we don't use the word even community college in Wisconsin. It's kind of weird, but we have the two-year college campuses, and then we have our technical college system. And at that time, 14 years ago, transfer was really not so much so on the radar of the technical college system radar in terms of the focus on more career technical education, workforce development. So I experienced a lot of the pushback and also tensions when it comes to focusing on transfer and viewing some of the CTE programs as potential pathway to STEM baccalaureate and beyond. But that was also the kinds of tensions that turned into even greater motivation, because to me, anything that is limiting students' possibility to move upward or elsewhere in education, that became unsustainable and not quite acceptable. So long story short, I think it's really the personal experiences, inspiration, and then where I was situated and seeing a post-secondary problem where transfer wasn't quite the possibility, but now things have changed monumentally in the best possible sense in Wisconsin. but then also as a researcher with the hope to produce something continuously meaningful that would speak to practitioner colleagues. That kind of got me into all of this. And final note I want to add, because we're here because we care about STEM, and then you all probably have heard from colleagues or others in the field, always, kind of processing the tension together in terms of why STEM, right? Is this because it's the hottest, or is this because of why STEM, right? And I view this, I think, a lot of that is true in terms of, for example, the priorities of funding agencies. I don't want to deny those, and those are important. But also in an even more important and very honest sense, for those of us who truly care about equity and equity implications of all education practices, the STEM is this both magnifier and microscope where we can really clearly see and interrogate a lot of the inequities experienced by our students, whether it's from our unintended practices or it's owing to the larger systemic issues. So I'll just pause there, and see what's next.
Yeah, and I think you started talking a little bit about all those different things. And thank you so much for sharing your background and how you gotten to this point. One of your amazing contributions to the STEM education realm and literature and love is your book On My Own. What led you, I have it right here because it's like one of my handy dandy books that I have. What led you to On My Own, and what really were your motivations as you were navigating and creating this amazing piece?
Thank you, Maria. And that was really, actually, I was feeling like, for a second, I was rambling. And then when you asked this question, I realized, okay, this seamlessly blends to the next, because it was because precisely those commitments and tensions. And then soon after I started my faculty career at Wisconsin, and I really wanted to look at transfer pathways in STEM and viewing STEM more expansively than some being terminal and some being transferable. Really just, that kind of was my motivation. So, and then it kind of motivated me to a little naively go for a pretty massive NSF grant with a focus on transfer from 2-year institutions to 4-year institutions as the solo principal investigator. And that was the 3rd year into my tenure track. I didn't know better. And but then it was just like really a full heartedly going into this process because I care about this issue. I think it's important. And when I was crafting the proposal, and I was crafting a very, very complex, large-scale mixed method study and longitudinal mixed method study, and I didn't know what writing a book actually would be like. But intuitively, as I was crafting the proposal, I intuitively felt with this amount of data across the educational trajectories of students, it seemed like a book would do their justice. And so without intentional planning, and kind of I wrote in the proposal and saying there will be a culminating book, right? And I, didn't know what that would look like. But then doing this entire project, of course, in collaboration with an amazing team of students and now colleagues, many of them colleagues, we really started to understand so many nuances and so many facets in STEM transfer aspiring students' journeys within the classroom, in advising situations, and then navigating transfer policies, articulation, and post-transfer experiences and such. And then 4 years later, the book idea made perfect sense now, because we were fortunate enough that we were collaboratively publishing a ton of articles. But then I felt no single empirical article can do even close the justice in terms of the complexity and nuances of student experiences. So then this is more from the sort of the researcher consideration in terms of what is the best venue to harness research findings at that particular magnitude. But another collaborating thought at the time was my increasing understanding about why we as academic researchers do not always or are not always able to have our findings being utilized. And I realized that there was a lot of kind of academic norms that made us write in ways that are indecipherable or unpleasant to read. And so not to say that my book was anything much better, but I'm realizing, engaging in book writing seems to represent a possibility or new possibility model for me to still ground my writing within rigorous research, but let the presentation, the narrative really be truthfully heartfelt and honest stories and narratives that would speak to the human heart, whether those are any readers, academic readers, or colleagues working in the practitioner world. So I think that part, and also during that process, it's a new intellectual venture for me, and that process completely changed me as a person, as a writer, as a thinker. And so just like toward the tail end of that, it went from something I'm just trying to promise the funder to show the scope of this work to something that's completely life and career trajectory changing for me. But the best rewards till this day, including this very moment, is that even one person or 5 people who really do this work in collaboration with community colleges or within community colleges and say, what you wrote in that book makes sense. And that's my biggest reward. And it will always be my biggest motivation.
Yeah, and I think that's for the setting and having these amazing collaborators, even on this call today, to be able to hear it and know it a little bit more. It's exactly the impact. So thank you so much again for it. And you started talking a little bit about like the heart, or being able to like really center the feeling aspect of things right in the beginning of the book. There's a quote from a participant, Kimberly, that states, "But many of us didn't make it here." Like, how does that frame, or how did that come to framing the beginning of the preface and like the rest of the book? Because when I first opened this book and that was the first thing I read, it really hurt me. It like hit me in the soul, in the heart, in understanding student experiences and the amazing other things that came after it. So kind of how did that quote how did you use that quote to really use that as a beginning tool of this whole conversation for on my own?
Yeah, I'm so glad you picked that up because how to open that book was the most challenging part of my writing, and actually it came toward the very end of my writing process because I don't want to start the book with something that doesn't feel right. And there are so many things I could play with. But for broader context for colleagues here who may not have read the book, Kimberly was a community college transfer student attending Ohio State at the same time. I was a budding doctoral candidate. So Kimberly was an engineering transfer student from Columbus State Community College. So she was just starting her fall quarter. That was a quarter system then. And then I was a second year rising doctoral student. And so she was one of those amazing transfer students I mentioned earlier in this webinar that I personally interacted with through multiple occasions. One is just chance encounter that I wrote about in the preface, but then also later she was one of the participants in a student affairs assessment project I was coordinating, looking at transfer students engagement at the university. So, and it was really, the quote actually happened in one of those conversations when I was really saying, just, your story is such an inspirational story, you transfer students, you're just really amazing. I literally, because I had a lot of biases unknown to myself, and realizing then those are really, really just completely biases and such. But her reaction was not the reaction sort of, yeah, this is, yeah, thank you, or that. But she was really saying many of us didn't make it here, meaning her community college transfer aspiring peers who, unlike her, for whatever reason, didn't end up attending Ohio State or other universities. And then, long story short, they didn't realize their transfer goals. So I think Kimberly and her quote served as many, many important lasting motivations for me. One of them being just really kind of demonstrating the reflexivity. Not only she demonstrates, but also probably among the top qualities of all of us who care about students in whatever capacity. It's almost like there is a success part of the story of an individual student or of a group of students, but then behind that success story, there is this other side of the equation where maybe some were left behind and for other reasons. So that's one thing. But another framing that was forever complicating is that Kimberly forever complicated my fascination with the transfer function through community colleges, because on one hand, it is really opening possibilities. On the other hand, can and does transfer serve as a mechanism that perpetuate inequalities, right? So I think that's kind of, I've been all these years, I've been always navigating between my advocacy for community colleges and transfer versus my loving critiques of the function and also practices and policies meant to support these functions. And finally, I think Kimberly is the embodiment of the assets and talents community college and transfer students truly are. When she was receiving very heartfelt compliments, her first reaction was about her community, especially those who, probably as agentic and resilient as she was, and just the system had failed them. Not being there. So I think it's really speaking to the kinds of the talents and then the community orientation of this particular student population.
Yeah, and you started talking a little bit about your loving critiques and like how in Kimberly's case really impacted the way you saw transfer trajectory and pathways. Can you share more about how findings of this book are relevant to work that you do for overall STEM and community colleges, and how it's influenced STEM transfer pathways?
Yeah, I think one of the main contributions I was hoping through this book was that I hope the book has provided a really holistic, longitudinal, and super complex journey. Instead of isolated aspects of student experiences, instead of isolated, policy interventions at one point or another, I hope through the students' trajectories as described in my book, it painted that complex, holistic, and sometimes problematic whole picture of STEM pathways through community colleges, transfer or not. And I think for the STEM communities, actually, I'm reasonably familiar with the STEM communities and the work you all do. I think this really is synergistic to the vision of STEM being, developing itself, but also evolving into just like a super complex ecosystem that really works. So I think, I hope by contributing these kinds of insights, and we can all appreciate the student journeys and experiences from a holistic systems perspective. And then what this means in terms of some of the things being done within STEM, it means every single new thing we do may trickle into something else. For example, if we're to implement like a new mentor guide to guide, the entire consortium, and that could potentially influence, for example, the mentoring guide can be requiring students to do, this amount of mentoring meeting. And then that might also have complex implications for their life obligations and other work commitments or other aspects of their engagement in high impact practices. So I think that kind of ecosystem lens was hopefully a good contribution. And I think another perspective, this was actually something I didn't write about in the book, but it's something a practitioner colleague provided me in terms of a positive piece of feedback. They were talking about how reading the stories of the students, it made them realize a lot of what they had done, even coming from the best places, the lens was not necessarily from how students experience me or how students experience what we do. So I found that to be a perspective reshaping lens. It's almost like also, connecting this to STEM. I think NSF has a specific solicitation about what these communities should do, but the perspective is the action, the actor is from the educators. So like we do this, we implement that. And this is all super helpful. And then in evaluation, knowledge generation efforts, and I'm pretty sure we always ask questions, what are students' experiences and such. But still, that framing, that subtle shift of the framing in terms of how students experience us, and that can, put a lot of good pauses in terms of us reflecting on the unnecessary complexity of things behind the things we implement, or the unnecessary vagueness of or a lack of accessibility in some of the written policies and documents that we expect students to navigate. So I think the shifting of the perspective, always asking the question, how do students experience us, was hopefully a helpful angle. And kind of closely related to that, on my own, I wrote a lot about many student experiences where their instructors and advisors and others they encountered, they were super helpful and well-intended. But at the same time, it's because sometimes in our hastiness and eagerness to be offering encouragement, we kind of unknowingly close doors for students to fully articulate their needs and context. And I always, cite, for example, the story of Katie, who grappled with ADHD and mental health, all kinds of challenges as a single mom, and all of this interlacing complexities of her life. And she was a typical first-gen student and really never wanted to ask to be needy, quote unquote, to ask for a lot of things. And so the one time she mustered enough courage to want to share with her instructor about her ADHD and can't make a chemistry lab work. And before she, said anything more, the instructor was just reassuring her and saying, "Oh, no, you're not struggling. From my vantage point, you're doing great. You're doing fine." And so Katie, never got to share her accommodation needs, and so she literally just thought, okay, my instructor said I was doing fine, then I must be doing fine. And so that's kind of the beginning of the quote unquote ending of Katie's journey. So she was on the taking a break journey, meaning that no transfer and no credential completion. So I think kind of, the gaze, prompt this inward self-reflective gaze, to check in with ourselves about assumptions and beliefs behind what seems to be really high impact practices or good intentions. I think that's another important point I wanted to highlight.
And you started talking a little bit about my next question. And as you know, and how Dr. Van Noy has kind of opened up, the Community College STEM Network, or how we coin it as CCSN, our mission is to connect, support researchers and practitioners in conducting and translating research and on how students navigate STEM pathways into evidence-based practices, programs, and policies. How does your research findings speak to that instance? You started talking about how the STEM programs are working, but focusing on those STEM grants, especially in the community colleges, what are relevant points and critical information from your research that you think are ways to really practice and implement those things on a more cohesive level for community colleges?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I thought about this a little bit. And so I have one sort of process related recommendation based on my findings. And then I have a few more substantive points. And so for the process, I want to quickly share, let's see, I wanted to quickly share a slide that I prepared for today. I don't have many, but this one, if I'm able to just get the share going. All right, here. Maria, did it come through okay?
Yep, I see it.
Perfect, right. So this is it's actually a nice collaboration to the things I mentioned earlier about, the complexity of the journey. I found this process, call it just a very simple 3-prompt process in terms of guiding very large scope kind of work like the STEM communities work. And so this is the process I envision in terms of building toward equity guided student supports. And it kind of started with constructing or deconstructing the journey, like the student's journey, how students experience this, whether you're looking at transfer as a key part of your STEM work, or whether you're looking at credential completion at the community college, and regardless of transfer. So what is that holistic or maybe super complex journey that students have to navigate through your own institution or programmatic context? And I offer this often because I'm realizing a lot of times we just didn't have, we were all overworked and we didn't have a lot of time to pause, and then especially in collaboration with colleagues in working in other functional areas to actually connect these dots. But if we have spaces like this, and collectively we'll be able to kind of build out that journey. So these are the pieces that are all going into the student journey, whether it's STEM transfer or just STEM completion. So starting with that, deconstructing the STEM journey or the STEM transfer journey. And then typically when engaging in this exercise, I just had a good practice with Madison College, our local community college here last week, actually. I was keynoting for their transfer summit. And so it doesn't take long because you all hold knowledge. But once that kind of journey or like simple map came to fruition, and then we'll be able to see some really problematic spots or super challenging areas. And that's where critical contextualization of the journey becomes important. And by critical contextualization, I was really talking about those stubborn problematic areas, for example, in terms of transfer credit loss, at the point and post the point of transfer, that might be a problematic area. And or for students, for example, following and not doing particularly well in some of the gateway STEM courses, that might be another potential area. But critical contextualization would mean that we contextualize these problem areas not necessarily in light of our ideal student or ideal instructor or ideal advisor, meaning that they should have done this and that, on an individual basis, but rather what are some structural supports and barriers and opportunities and challenges that reside within our context that would allow us to resolve those kinds of problem spots. So I say this again because sometimes one of the problem areas I heard from a particular practitioner colleague team is about students not enrolled in the right transfer courses. And then when it's basically they're on the wrong pathway. And then if we contextualize that by saying, well, students didn't seek information, they were, not asking for help, or they didn't go to advising, then we're not really honoring student realities and context and where they get the most important information, and also whether and how we made the information in our system very accessible, right? So that's not critical contextualization. So that's just an example, and to say this is really about structural challenges and opportunities for change. And that, hopefully will lead to some real change. And just the cycle is iterative, and it will be continuing. So that's like an offer of maybe a process, a revisit, and you may already engage in something way better than this, or this might be representing some newer possibilities and directions. But in my experiences, I found this exercise to be very generative. And then, this is just like an example of the transfer map I was talking about, convoluted transfer journey, all of these things, right, based on literature. And then I wanted to offer another, I'll stop sharing this, but I want to also offer a few more substantive points to your question, Maria. One is, I really think as STEM communities and ourselves included, we should re-envision what high impact practices really mean. I know, again, NSF in their STEM solicitation, they have listed examples and then they talk about evidence proven, but at the same time, one of the tensions I think many of you would agree with is that there's a need for us to interrogate the high impact practices cited in the solicitation in collaboration with the community college population that we're serving. Because a lot of the literature grounding those high impact practices may or may not center the student population you're working with. And they may have STEM implications, they may have community college implications, but not necessarily in terms of the very sort of like clearly and a little bit sometimes in this particular context. But then it's through your knowledge generation components and through evaluation efforts, I think there is a lot of room to be questioning and to be re-envisioning about high impact and meaningful practices that can really, really work. And here I want to just bring up this recurring issue that I saw across different STEM communities is this mandatory advising. It has not worked based on my anecdotal engagements, but there are multiple already, has not worked conclusively with students. And many students didn't necessarily show up, and some other challenges are the kinds of challenges mentors are grappling with. And then eventually, if in response to a grants requirement, and eventually it became almost like a transactional thing that has to be checked off. And that's going to be a missed opportunity. So I think there's a lot of possibility to re-envision and redefine high impact practices for STEM students. And related to that point, I think it's truly important to engage community college students as active and agentic collaborators in guiding the process. I know for a fact that you all engage students in many ways, but I was really talking about, speaking of practices we're doing and we're implementing, where are their voices? Their voices shouldn't be just left to the evaluation efforts or knowledge generation after the fact, but rather finding ways to engage them as active conceptualizers, collaborators from the get-go would be so important. I'll go off again, back to examples I mentioned, like KD, for instance, engaging students like them from the get-go, intentionally asking the kinds of support and communication venues that would most serve them, rather than waiting for students to be very proactive and or having them just be survey respondents. I think that's this is a great possibility. And finally, I'm realizing, especially when it comes to STEM transfer, there is a lot of big picture that neither the student had necessarily fully grasped when they think about transfer or other important transitions, nor were that part of those of us in support students' active mindsets in terms of big picture. I think in support of transfer students, for instance, a lot of advising colleagues or instructor colleagues who support students directly or indirectly, we rightfully so focus on the granular aspects and policy, or making students things are lined up here and there in this department, that department. But then oftentimes the larger picture, so what, why do you want to transfer? How does that factor into your community, your career, potential career path? How does it factor into just, who you think you are and you want to be professionally and as a person and contributor to society? So I think a lot of that kind of big picture discussion would be really helpful. Our reflection would be really, really helpful. And somehow you would be way more creative than I am to build that into the STEM support ecosystem. I think that kind of big picture guidance, the so what will be so important. And actually crediting a student I personally interviewed about a program similar to STEM, but it's not STEM, but the students, this is actually the student quote, and they were saying, they asked us to do a lot of things, but so what? Tell me the so what, or I'm not going to engage for real. So being like, I'll just show up and grab my pizza or whatever, I should be provided. So I think, those are the point. Re-envisioning the big, high impact practices and engaging students as active and agentic collaborators and providing the big picture behind main practices and around major transition points and milestones.
No, thank you so much. There were so many different actionable things that you've mentioned, and amazing chart to see of how everything works together and that pathway. I want all the things to really understand it more and have more conversation about this. As we're getting closer to time, I'm gonna go to our last question on this end so we can open up to questions and have a bigger conversation with everyone else. As I mentioned in your introduction, you have a new book, Delivering Promise, that just came out recently, from what I understand. What should we expect from this new edition, and what do you think will be big factors that come out of it as it's freshly coming out?
Maria, you are the best ever moderator, organizer. I just love you so much. Now, selfishly. So like a moment of shameless self-plug, and this is the cover. See, this is the theme. I'm so not a visual learner, and I have ADHD too. So like, don't give me images of book cover in terms of, I totally, this is, you see the theme. This is totally on my own, but the brighter.
On my own, reversed.
Right. But Delivering Promise is really touching almost all major facets of a community and technical college education. It is really grounded within primarily qualitative interviews. I personally conducted all those interviews, 126 interviews with various stakeholders over the course of the pandemic, and documenting their day-to-day practices when they grapple with changing innovation, because almost forced to, but at the same time, many of those view the pandemic as a catalyzing opportunity to engage in change. They wanted to engage for so long, but also they are grappling with equity implications of their work. So the long story short, the central argument behind the stories of this book is that educational change and innovation need to center equity front and center, rather than viewing equity as an afterthought or add-on. Otherwise, the change and innovation we implement will unintendedly perpetuate inequalities, because then again, who has access, who is the go-getter and such. So almost like innovation and equity are parts and parcel of the same equation if we're talking about educational improvement. And a teaser, I think I kind of invented at least one word or two words. That is in terms of how we think about student supports in context of STEM. That is unclutter and holisticize. Unclutter is easy to understand, but it's really about a lot of the innovation. One of my participants, my biggest innovation is to remove the many barriers we unintentionally set up for our students. Isn't that something that doesn't make sense and yet makes a lot of sense? The biggest change in innovation being to actively remove the many barriers we actively and unintendedly set up for our students. And so that's uncluttering. And holisticize, meaning just, that big picture, and really harnessing pieces of important student experiences and make that as smooth and as effortful, not effortless, as effortful, but as weightless as possible. So that's, this is, I will, sorry, yeah, I'm just.
No, perfect. No, thank you.
See, I can only do like a 2 minute self promotion.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited. Obviously, I don't have it in hand yet, keyword yet. But thank you so much for sharing with us the work that you put into On My Own, and now this new Delivering Promise. I'm excited to get my hands on it and read it and see what things we can incorporate into the CCSN and moving forward to better support practitioners and move forward our mission. And I did want to provide time for question and answer. And Renuka, I know that you had your hand up. I'm not sure if it was purposeful, because I know sometimes Zoom is a little funky, but wanted to make sure to have time for you all as well.
I just wanted to tag on to the uncluttering. We recently did the students actually did a survey of student experiences around our college. and disorganization was the number one thing that they were affected by. And disorganization, within a course, but also disorganization of information on our website, disorganization in all kinds of ways. So really clarifying, the path that students need to take, even just to register, right? Where do they find support? All of those things I think is a huge part, particularly for community college students.
You sounded so insightful and like many of my participants in the book, and I think that I just wanted to super quickly respond to that thoughtful observation in the sense that we're doing so much. You all are doing so much, and so what can you take off your plate that is actually still supporting students, maybe in better and more efficient ways? I think that mindset shift I was taught by my participants. Just was something that I keep on citing. What can you take off the faculty and staff plate, and so that you can actually better serve students, right? So doing less, but with higher impact.
And intentionality, I think, is kind of something that I hear underlying there too. Yeah, so please, thank you again for the comment, Renuka, and Dr. Wang, for adding a little bit more context into that. Please feel free to do the raise your hand function, unmute, and or write questions in the chat. Since we have Dr. Wang here for a couple more minutes. If not, I'm going to make up some more questions myself because I'm curious about all the things. Okay. So Dr. Bragg is in the chat. So happy you have joined us today, Shuli, and all your interviews with community college STEM students. I'm wondering if you see any patterns of experiencing by STEM discipline, e.g. engineering, computer science, various technologies, etc. Any insight for us in that regard?
Yeah, this is such a, oh, hi Deb, I love you. And then this is such a good question. No surprises coming from you. And I alluded to this a little bit in the first chapter of On My Own, the sort of the paradox of active learning. And in that, I'm so happy to see you. One of this is really interestingly, and I think this is an indirect way to address this probably most challenging and meaningful question, is that a lot of the STEM disciplines offered at a community college and that are very suited and probably more likely to be filled with active learning approaches, for lack of a better term, or like such as contextualized learning and hands-on and such. And they seem to be, operating in this very contradictory way. One is that they're boosting students' confidence and, their the cultivation of their professional identity. But at the same time, they may or may not see that thread continuing on, even for those who transfer to a four-year institution. And then they will be, oh, engineering is not that fun anymore. And then so that may just demotivate them towards something else, or leading some to even reverse transfer back, right? So it's interesting. There's a lot of good value in terms of active learning approaches, but they tend to concentrate in the sort of less transferable pathways, 4-year and 2-year. And then the more transferable ones, and like chemistry and some of the foundational math courses, and like these students I interviewed, they don't always describe them as the most interesting, but then those are more likely to concentrate in the sort of transferable pathways. So I don't know. I think this is just like a finding that I personally was so fascinated by, and this is where really STEM experts, because I'm not, STEM experts will have a lot of solutions, right? And insights toward that.
Any other questions from the audience? Comments, concerns? Think bubbles? I do have one additional question that I know I was swirling. Oh, here we go. Elizabeth has, Dr. Mesa has added a question in the chat. I loved your convoluted map. Could you talk through it a little bit more?
Sure, I can show you. And this is what I prepared for my keynote at the Transfer Summit at Madison College last week. So it was fresh, but it was not prepared for you. Sorry, but it was prepared for my colleagues at Madison College. So, was this, Elizabeth, was this what you're talking about?
I think the one that I was thinking of, it had financial.
Yeah, that's the
Yes,
next one.
that's the one that I was thinking of.
Right. And then they're the same, this is the same map. Actually, there are two, there were two slides of the same journey. So it's really about the transfer journey. And this is like deconstructing their journey and starting with, all these kinds of barriers. And these are the kinds of barriers that are included both in my book, but also building from pretty long history of transfer research. And so I can also share with you and the leadership team afterwards about a 2-pager that I wrote for the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students, highlighting all of these barriers. But so it's almost like starting with how community college typically function in terms of curricula complexity. This would mean like students will just, kind of navigate through an overwhelming amount of choices, and advising approaches, at least the more traditional advising approaches, help yourself, serve yourself, cafeteria style, and scarcity in major to major articulation. And even if there are such articulation, they were not always made super clear in the system. And students sometimes will be in one chemistry class that was not transferring, and the quote will be like, you can cam this, cam that, cam this, cam that, but only one of them is a transferable one. And these other things you're probably super familiar with. But then as the transfer journey continued, and lack of financial support, this is both motivationally defeating, but also is just a real reality for many students. But this is also where the big picture came into play that I talked about earlier, is that many students did not know that there are ways to fund your graduate education, if your goal is eventually toward graduate education, where you can be funded, especially if they're interested in education and humanities and social sciences, even though not STEM, but many STEM too. There were funding opportunities, but so many students really did not have a good understanding of that's possible. So I think that kind of relates back to that big picture part. So, and then I'll just pause here instead of doing a lot of talking, but this is the map.
Yes, and I know there's another question or a hand raised from Dr. Tyson.
I will. Hello, so good to see you.
Hey, I just wanted to say, hey, I'm on a family vacation. I'm actually at a Skyline Chili in Northern Kentucky right now. But I was able to listen to your talk in the car while I'm sitting, and I really enjoyed your talk. And obviously, I'm a big fan of your work.
Likewise.
As one of the few people who's been doing this work on community college students and transfer for the last several years now. But just thank you so much for joining our project to give a talk, and just really appreciate your work.
Oh, thank you so much. It means so much, coming from all of you. So I appreciate you. So good to see you, Will. And enjoy your family.
So good to see you too.
That's more important.
Hopefully I'll see you maybe the ATPI meeting later this year.
October, right?
Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. Bye. Hey, rest of the team.
Have fun.
Oh, perfect. We have a couple minutes left, so I want to take this time to say if there's any last minute questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If not, thank you so much for being here and taking part of this conversation with us. Clap for Dr. Wang and being able to do all the amazing things. Thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom with us on this summer day. And we had a really great turnout, and it seems that people are reacting and being able to integrate this work into their everyday lives. And thank you so much for being here. Dr. Van Nooyen, not sure if you want to close it out a little bit.
Yeah, I would just wanted to thank you, Maria, Dr. Espino, for moderating a wonderful, wonderful webinar today. And again, thank Julie Wang for joining us today for such a wonderful, insightful discussion. And thank everybody who joined us today. We'll be sending out follow-up with a link to the recording, and look forward to engaging everybody on future webinars. So thanks again, and enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Take care.
Appreciate you all so much.
Thank you.